Today's reading was Psalm 141 through 145. And just so you don't know, I haven't said this in a while. We do have a daily reading plan where we're reading 5 Psalms a day. And I pull one of those and just share some thoughts from reflection on my quiet time, just in case you've started watching this recently. So you can follow along with us. It correlates with the day, the calendar day. Today's the 29th. And so if you take 5 Psalms every day of the month, of course, there's 31 days, but it doesn't work out this month. But you can go back and catch up on Psalm 119. Anyway, that's the way we do it. I was struck this morning as I was reading Psalm 142, and I think I'm just going to start there this morning. I'll share some very personal things with you. But what I was struck by was around verse 6, where David writes, "Attend to my cry, for I am brought very low." In the margin of my Bible, there's a date that I had put there, and it was January 29th, 2013. And I was at that place in my life. My whole family was. It seemed like everything was just wrecked. Probably has been the most difficult period of our life that we have gone through thus far. And David is writing this psalm, and we're not sure when David wrote the psalm, either when he was fleeing from Saul. You remember Saul was the king, and David had been anointed as God's chosen one to succeed him on the throne. And Saul sought out to kill him, and he had to hide in the caves, and his life was threatened, etc. Unconsequential of any action of David at all. There were 2 times in David's life that he had this journey. Once was when he was fleeing from Saul, where he had not done anything to bring this trouble on in his life. The second time, of course, when he was fleeing from his son Absalom, and that was David's doing. Of course, we remember the story of his adultery with Bathsheba, having Uriah killed, the baby dies. And so he subsequently lost the throne because of that. But I personally think that this is probably when he was fleeing from Saul. He begins by writing in the psalm, "With my voice I cry out to the Lord. With my voice I plead for mercy to the Lord. I pour out my complaint before him. I tell my trouble before him." David is in a very hard place. You might be in a very hard place right now. Maybe you've gone through it, and today you can remember how God has redeemed that time in your life. But he cries out, and he pours out his complaint before him. I tell my trouble before him. I love that we can bring our complaint to him this morning. I brought a lot of complaints to him this morning. I just expressed my fears. I expressed my heart. I expressed my anxieties. I expressed my lack of assurance, all of those things. It was just a good time of telling him this morning. And that brought to mind an old hymn. I'm going to take you way back. Some of you, if you grew up in a First Baptist, you probably didn't sing this because it's not a sophisticated hymn. But if you grew up in a little country church like I did, you sang this quite regularly in church. It's an old hymn called "Tell It to Jesus." If you know that hymn, give me a quick heart on the button. Are you weary? Are you heavy-hearted? Tell it to Jesus. Tell it to Jesus. Do the tears flow down your cheeks unbidden? Tell it to Jesus today. Are you grieving over joys departed? Tell it to Jesus. Tell it to Jesus. Have you sins to men's eyes are hidden? Tell it to Jesus today. Tell it to Jesus. Tell it to Jesus. He's a friend that's well known. You've no other such a friend or brother. Jesus today. Do you fear the gathering clouds of sorrow? Tell it to Jesus, tell it to Jesus. Are you anxious? What shall be tomorrow? Tell it to Jesus today. Go ahead and tell it to him. Tell it to Jesus, tell it to Jesus. He's a friend that's well known. You've no other such a friend or brother. Tell it to Jesus today. Are you troubled at the thought of dying? Tell it to Jesus, tell it to Jesus. For Christ's coming kingdom are you sighing? Tell it to Jesus today. Tell it to Jesus, tell it to Jesus, tell it to Jesus. He's a friend that's well known. You've no other such a friend or brother. Tell it to Jesus today. Tell it to Jesus, tell it to Jesus. He's a friend that's well known. You've no other such a friend or brother. Tell it to Jesus alone. Aren't you glad you can tell it to Jesus? And can I tell you something? He's not shocked when we tell it to him. He already knows it. He wants to fellowship with us and bring healing to our soul and comfort during that time. But back to the psalm. David cries out and he says, Lord, I tell you of my trouble. Then in verse 3, he said, when my spirit faints within me, you know my way. In the path where I walk, they, my enemies, have hidden a trap for me. When I look to the right and see, there is none who takes notice of me. No refuge remains to me. No one cares for my soul. This phrase, when I look to the right, was a phrase that meant there was a guard or an attendant that would normally stand on the right side of the one they attended to. And even in this low place in David's life, there's no one else there with him. And he has a feeling that nobody cares for my soul. He knew that God did, and that's why he was able to cry out to God. In verse 5, he says, I cry to you, O Lord. I say that you are my refuge when nobody else is there. God, I cry to you, and I know that you are my refuge. You are my portion in the land of the living. And then he repeats that in verse 6 again. Attend to my cry, for I am brought very low. Again, the date in my Bible was January 29th, 2013. We were about 7 months into our long trial. We wouldn't get full deliverance or restoration until August of 2015. And so sometimes when we go through these long journeys in life, boy, they are very low. And I was so low at that point. I had been pastoring in a very prominent church in South Florida, executive pastor there, and had gone to another church to pastor there in North County of Palm Beach. And all of a sudden our life came untangled. I had returned back to the church where I was pastoring at an invitation to come there. And it was during that time when I lost my job. And to no fault of my own, the reason I lost my job was I would not go along with very wicked plans by the senior pastor there. And I found myself jobless all of a sudden. And I was jobless for about 2 days. From there, I went to valeting cars on Palm Beach Island. And if you know anything about a valet's wage, you recognize and realize that it's a service industry. And I couldn't make ends meet on that. During this time, we were literally fleeing from a drug-crazed madman who had made threats on my life, my family's life, was crazy, out of his mind. And I didn't know any day whether or not he was going to show up at my door, and there were times that he did. And as a matter of fact, at one time, the police came and arrested him when he was there. But I want to make this story short. The details really aren't that important. But I was worried about losing my house. I had an attorney that was trying to help us avoid foreclosure on a valet salary at 50 years of age. You can't make a house payment. About all I could do was put food on the table and pay the utilities. But it was going to be that following March of 2013 that God would begin to turn things around for us. And to make the story short, but during that time, my mother passed away, my wife's sister passed away, my father passed away, and we were just at a very low point and place in our life. And it would be until August of 2015 when God would begin to turn things around. What I'm trying to share with you this morning is I don't know what journey you might be going through. Maybe you're like David, where you feel like there's no one else there. And all you can do is cry out to God in anxiety. I just want to tell you that God is faithful and God restores. God turns situations around. Remain faithful to Him. Hold on to Him. Cry out to Him. Be honest with Him. I think I shared with y'all that it was during that year that the only place in my Bible that I could read were the Psalms. I even wanted to take my own life. Just being very candid and honest with you. I wanted to put my 6-hour in my mouth and pull the trigger. But God held us. He restored things. I was talking to a brother yesterday in the body, and for well over 3 years now, I guess, we've been praying hard for his marriage, and a couple of times really just thought it was over. And as I was talking to him yesterday, he began to share praises how there has been a dramatic turnaround. And God is moving in a marriage that he thought was over. God's restoring that. I heard of this last couple of weeks, another marriage in the body that God has just miraculously turned around, where there was really just no hope, it seemed. Those are just a couple of stories recently where I know that God is moving and God is answering prayers. And again, I don't know where you might be, but I can tell you this. God is faithful. God restores, and He is our hope. I rambled a lot through that psalm, but I thought it was important to share with you this morning of God's redemption, not the details of the horror stories, but that God does turn around, and just hold on. Let Him be your hope. Let's close with this song. Every day I look to You to be the stream of my life. Be the strength of my life. Be the strength of my life. Be the strength of my life today. Be the strength of my life. Be the strength of my life. Be the strength of my life today. I love You, Lord, and I lift my voice to worship You, oh my him, sing it out to him. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. He has done great things. He has done great things. He has done great things. Bless his holy name. One last time, bless the Lord. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, and all that is within me. I bless your holy name. Oh Lord, we love you and thank you so much, God, for your faithfulness to us. Well, today's Friday. I don't know what your weekend plans are. Today's my anniversary. I'm going to go buy a couple of nice, juicy steaks. I'm going to grill them out, and me and my darling are going to sit in the sunroom this evening and eat that nice steak and look in each other's eyes and go ooh and ah. And then about 7:30, we'll be tired and we'll go to bed. That's COVID-19 anniversary celebration. Lord bless you. Lord keep you. 37 years, by the way. May his face shine upon you. Have a great day. I love you all.